Welcome back to Closing Time with Pat and Denis. This is episode 4, and today you're going to learn all about your ideal customer profile and candidates as well for your sales team. So we look forward to talking about this subject, and we talked about it a little bit in episode 3, but today we're going into it a bit more. Right, Pat?
Yes, exactly. So we're going to give you a little bit more of a deep dive on this so that if you're wondering how do you come up with the correct ICP, that is something that your business is going to be able to rely on to get the growth that you're trying to attain. And then how that relates to the ideal candidate that you want to be bringing in, which is one of the core competencies of productivity.
Great. And I think with the ICP, it's a great exercise as like a blueprint. I know Pat said in the last episode, it was like, if you don't know where you're going, how do you know when you get there? Which was a great phrase, Pat. And I think with the ICP, not only for you, but the rest of the organization to look at this and make sure you're applying your resources in the right direction. So with that, Pat, from your experience, what should someone do when they're trying to understand or create their ideal customer profile?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that go into creating your ideal customer profile, and it's part of the overall how you creating your go-to-market strategy, right? And what I learned after, kind of figuring out that the way I was doing it previously, meaning, hey, the product's the best thing since sliced bread, and why isn't this thing selling? Is that you got to have it. It has to be actually, very much solving for a customer or solving for their problems, and it has to be in their language, right? So how do you go about doing that and creating that kind of, I'll call it ICP for lack of a better word, but how do you go about doing that process? And so there's kind of a couple things that I would do during my time as CROs, and I would go out and first off, I would say, okay, with the companies that I was working with, can we get an independent third party, or I can go do it since I'm relatively new in the company, right? Where we can go on and speak with 3 to 5 of what we consider to be our best customers who best match with us and that, are really kind of going to help us, get the trajectory in terms of our growth and address the market that we're trying to address and things like that, and go speak to them to try to understand, how did they find out about us? What problem are we solving for them? Why did this problem persist, right? Were there other, considerations, other alternatives that they look at, and et cetera, et cetera. So those types of questions that I would be asking them, or we get a third party, because one of the things about hiring a third party is that they can usually, if it's a credible third party, they can usually go ahead and get answers to questions that you and your company can't, because obviously your customers are trying to, they don't want you to kind of use that great value that you generated for them against them, and whether it's increasing their prices or whatever it happens to be, right? So that's why we would do that. So that's kind of the first thing, and you're trying to, as much as you can, is what are the problems that you are solving for them, right? And it's this idea of going from product market fit, which hopefully you're at, to, okay, well, why do we have product market fit? And then you're trying to transition to what I call problem market fit. And that's the, so what, who cares, why do they care, and what are the things that need to be done in order to solve the problem that potentially we could uniquely do, right? And so that's part of this, what you want to kind of suss out in terms of your customer learnings. Then you'll also want to do what I call a light version of, your positioning with a little bit of what you think the value is that the customer derives as a result of this capability that you have, right?
Yeah.
And then you can take that information, and that's what you end up pouring into your ideal customer profile. Now, there is one other thing that I started doing later in my career that was kind of complementary to this. One of the things that I think a lot of startups don't kind of take a step back and do before they start to kind of charge full on with their go-to-market is I do what's called the compass exercise, right? And that's where you start to look at, it's like, well, what will we look like when we reach, whether it's 50 million, 100 million, whatever you think that threshold is? What will we look like from a number of factors, whether it's, the market size, whether it's our pricing, what's the complexity of our product, what does it look like? Are we selling B2B, B2C, things like that? And we can let the audience know, where you can get this, an example of the customer exercise. You can put it in the comments or whatever it is below, Des. But what it's really trying to tell you is like, what is the weighting of resources of sales versus marketing in your overall go-to-market and in what's required to, address your ideal customer profile. So I started doing some of that as well. So those three things kind of, help you assemble your ideal customer profile. And what your ideal customer profile consists of, and we kind of hit this at a high level in the last episode, but I'll kind of go through this again, which is it really, you want to have a reasonably detailed description of what's the size of the company, right? What does that look like? Whether it's in terms of dollars of revenues that they generate or turnover, whether it's in terms of number of employees they have, or whether it's a business unit or geographic type of setup for them and things like that. That usually consists of, are they small, mid-market, or large enterprise type customers? And you want to be really clear about that, because one of the things that you're doing in your ISP is it's like, yes, this is where we're going to be successful. And then you're going to have the other column, which is do not spend time here. Because what is it that you have? What is the great equalizer of all time, Dennis? It's what? Time.
Time.
Right? Yeah. But we all get to sing well, right? Everybody gets to sing out every day. So part of this ICP is to have you tell you where to go versus where to not spend your time. Wasting your time, it's really not going to help your company.
I heard like there was a video I saw on LinkedIn yesterday of like a 100-person company with the CEO being like, sometimes on sales you gotta decide where you're going to say no to someone that you don't have the best product and stuff. Exactly. And I was like, hell yeah. Like if you want, like I was like, that's not like an epiphany. It's like with your sales team, it's literally like, where should they spend time to have the biggest win rates, biggest impact, which this is all about. Yeah,
exactly right. So that's why you have an ICP in terms of the companies that you're targeting or the industries you're targeting, things like that. So it's size of the company, it's the operational attributes, which is this idea of what either industry, or is there a market segment in the industry, or whatever it happens to be, right? Yeah. Is there a particular business model that they subscribe to, right? Are they more of a vertically integrated type of company, or are they one that has lots of different business units? Like an example of that would be like GE used to be this way, right? They used to have a GE Finance, GE aircraft engine, GE Medical, GE, right? That's a more distributed and not a vertically integrated company, if that makes sense, right? But what is their business model versus Walmart? It's pretty much Walmart. So, and then, are they like, in the example, what's their culture like? Well, in the case of Walmart, they were kind of like the low price leader, right? Is an example. So what is their operating philosophy or their culture? So that's what I mean by operational attributes. Yeah. Who you're selling to is what are the people that actually have the problem and can make decisions about it. And that will actually have to be held accountable to actually make this thing work, whatever it is that you're trying to solve for, if that makes sense, right? So that's your buyer personas and the like. The other aspect of your ICP is, and these are all part of the 6 senses that we talked about, but the fourth one is, what are the financial metrics? Meaning, do they care more about OPEX versus CAPEX? And then what is I'll call it, how do they justify investments? Is it ROI? Is it payback time? Is it net present value? There's lots of different hurdle rates that companies will use. You need to understand what that is for the companies that you're targeting or your ideal customer profile, right? Because if it's a company that is like, they can get CapEx anytime they want, but they're not taking on additional operating expenses because of the circumstances that they're in today, meaning maybe they're running out of money or whatever it happens to be, right? In order to get their growth, you really need to understand that, because if your option of what you're offering doesn't align with that, that could be a deal breaker for you. Then if that makes sense.
Yes.
Then there's the fifth sense is this idea of, do they have a bias around the solution, Meaning, are they more of a, we're going to do it ourselves? We got our own internal staff that we're going to go ahead and deploy this technology that you're, providing to us, or do they rely on consultants or integrators, or they're going to just outsource the entire, process themselves? You better understand that just as well, because that's going to have an effect on your product and or what your value proposition is. And the last thing is around technological bias. When you're a startup, this is particularly important because if these companies that you're targeting and have this problem happen to be more receptive to being, I'll say, new technology or innovative ways of people doing things, and they're okay with a small innovative company versus they're going to kind of just go with the tried and true business as usual with whoever has been providing them a solution, you need to know that. And you need to understand that about their culture, because otherwise you're going to spend a lot of time and then all of a sudden at the end of it, you're going to be second. And that's the worst place to be, right? So that's what the ICP consists of. And the way that you get that information is by doing these best fit customer learnings. You go out and you kind of try to come up with a straw man of what is the problem we're solving and who cares about that and why is it, as you know, you need to understand when you're doing these interviews. And you should also, to be quite frankly, you should be doing these interviews with your best fit customers, but you should also be doing it with a few of your, what I would call recently signed customers, and then some of your prospects who are high probability wins. And let me tell you why you want to do that, because sometimes you'll get a false positive, as in you'll say, well, these are our 5 best, but they actually may not align to where you all are going and what your value proposition is, right? They might be, they might be those customers that you got early in your company's career, and it was kind of like your friends and family type of customer acquisition. So you want to sprinkle that in with a little bit of, here's some recently signed customers, and then here's some high probability prospects that are gonna close here in the next, month or quarter or whatever it happens to be, right? And just get their perspective on the same type of questions of, what was the problem that they were solving and how did that process go, and getting at why did the problem persist, et cetera, right? Does that make sense? So you use that data to then feed into the business problems that you're solving, and then who and what your targets, your ICP, would look like, if that makes sense.
Yes. And I think something that's incredibly important to do as well, like you don't even need to be doing, like, just thinking about this all the time, I think, where you're saying to your current clients, like, how do you justify, or how do you find value with us? Or a good question I've asked sometimes is like, how do you justify spending money with us? Because it's very useful to hear how they articulate it versus you. And the way that they will articulate it might be much better messaging and positioning than what you're currently doing, which is another next step. But anyway, I just think that's a good thing to be always doing.
No, it's a very good point, Dennis, because as I said, in the beginning here, which is you have to talk about it in their terms, not how you think about it from your internal product and what you guys think your value proposition and things like that. It's a subtle nuance, but it's a really important one, because if most of the customers out there, they're getting bombarded by all sorts of, it's the attention deficit generation, right? But they're getting bombarded with all sorts of information about things that are maybe relevant to them, and which some of them might be yourself. And so it's like, so you really got to be able to create some kind of, unique awareness. And when you're talking about how they talk about it, whether it's with their peers or other people in their industry or whatever it is, that actually is a huge distinction, as opposed to talking about what you do as in your product. You're talking more about what their concern is and what they're experiencing, right? And it's more visceral to them.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes. Okay. One other question for you, Pat, just with this section. What do you do if you don't have any customers?
So if you don't have any customers, I would say to you, you're probably need to go out and you're going to need to go out and do what they call not owner, but, I'll call it, the founder-led sales, and you need to go out and
Yeah.
go get your first, and so if the founder is more of a technical person as opposed to a salesperson, you're going to be, or maybe you hire one salesperson to help you because the founder is very technological or product centric, right? And you're going to have to go out and do, kind of the journey out there, shepherding the new frontier and go figure out what it is.
Yeah. And I guess market research as well as you think, right?
Yeah, you can do market research, but I think that the best way to do is go out or ask yourself, well, why am I starting this company? I actually just did this recently with a company, and they were making a pivot from being more of a D2C type of company to going more to B2B.
Yeah.
And I asked them, I said, well, okay, so what was it that you saw a gap in the market that made you start up the original company, which was a D2C, and they explained it to me. And I said, okay, now you've decided you're going to pivot over to this new B2B type of business paradigm. What was it that you saw, or why did you do that? Tell me a little bit about why you did that.
Yeah.
And that gets to this notion of, is there a gap? Is there something that you saw that a lot of these types of folks, these types of ICPs were struggling with? That's a problem that nobody has been able to, address today, or address it very effectively, or they're frustrated with, or whatever it happens to be. Yeah. That's how you deal with if you don't have customers, as opposed to when you do have customers, how do you start getting out of product market fit and going to growing and scaling and making your, sales force more productive and expanding your markets and things like that. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think what you said there as well resonated with me, that why you are creating this product or service, or a new product and service, it should never be like an insular reason. It shouldn't be like, oh, our current market sucks, or we don't make much margin from it, so we have to do it. It has to be customer or market led, to see like if there's a problem you can solve.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because otherwise, I use the term "you're a technology in search of a problem." There's lots of those out there, a lot of startups out there, and that's the reason why, venture capitalists, they get 1 out of 10 right. They're basically
builders and they will come is not correct. Like
no, it's nobody. As how I always say, and even I say this I had to learn the hard way, which is, I had to fail for 4 times and then learn that nobody cares. The best product rarely wins in the B2B technology space, right? Because even more so today, right? Nobody really cares what your product is. All they care about is, how do you help me to get to my goal, or solve for my outcome, or my problem that I'm dealing with? How is it you're going to best do that for me? Or WIIFM, what's in it for me? So that's what they care about. So
great.
Anyway, so there you go on. That's the ICP from the standpoint of how do you create that, and we can give you more details around that, and we'll post something into the blog, to help people out with how do you go about that, because that process, there's a lot that goes into that, but it's really important that you do it, because if you miss on it, then you're gonna struggle to get market traction. I'll just say that, right? Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Now, so just as a point, so when you do have your company's target ICP and that sort of thing, the reason why you need to have that is there's a ripple effect on a lot of things, right? One, obviously, what your product should or shouldn't be. So that if you're sitting there wondering, whether you should, be doing this sprint with your products or these features with your product, this is going to give you a lot of guidance. That's number one, right? Yeah. But as it relates to the selling side of it, right, that this is I'll say a really important vehicle that helps feed into what your ideal candidate profile should look like, right? And so, and what it does is it really kind of answers the questions for your sales and marketing team of the basic fundamentals, right? What's the business problem we're solving? That comes out of what we're doing with our ideal customer profile, right?
Yeah.
Who is it that cares about that? Or who is it that owns that, right? Around buyer persona. Why is it important? And, oh, by the way, if it is important, is there a consequence of them doing it or not doing it, right? Because things can be important for certain, constituents in a company, but that may not be that there's no, really, it's like, oh, maybe it'd be kind of cool to try it, as opposed to, no, actually we go out of business if we don't do this, right? Or we get, we can't, meet our financial goals or whatever it happens to be, right? And then it also gives you the ability for your selling team and your marketing team to talk about, well, and this, by the way, is how our company can uniquely solve these types of problems for businesses such as yours, right?
Yep.
And then the last thing is which is a thing that I think you would, and like to get your opinion on this, but it's like, I'm sure you get asked by CEOs and by board members, is there a way we can speed up the process, right? How do we get more urgency around our customers to, engage with us in our business? So I'd be curious to get your perspective on that in terms of, do you hear that a lot from whether it's your CEOs or it's your board or, they're thinking about that as, why now? Why is it that they should be engaging with us and, buying our solutions?
In terms of like speeding it up, the amount you can acquire?
No, speeding up the time to them acquiring. How's that?
Okay.
Getting it to be more urgent, right?
Shorter sales cycle.
Yeah. If it's important and there's a pretty heavy consequential, well, then why should they do anything?
Right?
As opposed to why now?
Yeah. I think some of it, a lot of it you can actually control. Some of it you can't control. Like, I think, is it a top 3 problem for them that needs to be solved? If it's not a top 3 problem, for a person with authority and sign off on a buyer side, and then you're going to have a bit of an issue. Indecision, non-urgency. I think as well with if you're with more junior members of that organization, their priorities are much deprioritized in an organization versus what the actual key decision makers who are very closely linked to P&Ls will decide. So I think that's one. I think another is actually just on your side, like that something you can control, which we talked about in the last episode. And this is like, how good are you at ramping people, like your sellers? Like, how good are they at this capturing demand, which we haven't talked about capturing demand yet, but that much. But like, how good are they at understanding getting someone through that sales cycle quickly and efficiently? And that a lot of the time needs constant work on your ICP, on your enablement, hiring the right people, like we're just saying, living up to your promises and with your client when you get them, because they talk to other people as well. So they'd be kind of some of the ones.
Yeah. And I think, thank you. Great intro to the biggest, I'll say, the impact that having this ICP has from the standpoint of going out and hiring and or gaining productivity is, first of all, like you mentioned, right? How much time are they spending in these opportunities, and because you only got so much time. So if somehow you're veering off the track and you're spending time with don't go here type of activities, that's going to have a big impact on your productivity and your ability to grow your sales team and your company. The second thing is this idea of what you just talked about, which is how effective are they in terms of a success rate, right? Their win rates and how they're doing as it relates to that, right? Are we having high win rates or not having high win rates? And that's a really big one to be paying attention to, because that also tells you about how many people you should be hiring or not hiring, and, how effective they are, and the like. And then the last thing that I learned that by having this detailed ICP and being able to arm your salespeople to answer these questions is that it has a huge impact on your ability to increase your average selling price of your offering.
Yes. Yeah.
Massive. Because these are the people that care, meaning your ICP, and it's valuable to them.
Yeah.
So pricing, they're not trying to, beat it. Now, granted, if you have purchasing involved and stuff like that, they're always going to do that. But the customers themselves, especially if it's B2B, if there's value there, then they're willing to pay it because it's so painful for them to deal with this problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So those are the things that you actually can affect with respect to, your, and why you need to know that ICP.
Yeah.
Okay, like
Agreed.
from the customer and the target customer. Okay. As it relates to the ideal candidates profile, right? Why having this ICP
Yeah.
is important is there's a couple things that get affected by that, I guess I would call it, right? And that is that what you're really going to do with that ideal customer profile is you're going to try to build out, for example, a position description. So what does a position description typically consist of, right? It usually consists of, hey, this is going to be the role, here's, what your, I'll call it,
Yeah.
responsibilities are going to be
Yeah.
for the role, right?
Job spec.
Yeah, it's really, it's a position. It's like, here's the role, here's what you're going to be responsible for. Here's the knowledge that there's a difference between knowledge, skills, traits, and execution. So I'm going to just quickly tap on each of these, right? The knowledge is the what to do, right? The knowledge that you desire. And that needs to be in there when you're doing your position description, right? The skills are the how they have either done it or we are hoping that they have done it previously, right? Then there's experience, which is, okay, you know how and what. Give me a track record or something that tells me that you've actually, executed against this sort of thing. And then the last thing is what are the traits I would expect to see about you, right? And I call it the why. And these are usually not as tightly aligned with the ICP, but more aligned, meaning as in the customer ICP. They're more aligned with your internal ICP or a candidate profile, right? Meaning, okay, so the people that we are trying to hire or that we hope are in the current roles that we have, if you're transitioning your go-to-market, they possess, these type of skills. They possess this kind of knowledge. We can teach them knowledge, so they don't necessarily have to have the knowledge piece of it, but the traits that they need to have to be successful in our organization and in this market that we're going after look like this. And that's usually where, for example, we talked about this in the last episode, but remember how I said that you want to have a people leadership philosophy or a methodology that you use when you're in the leadership role?
Yep.
Well, one of the things when I talked about, what every associate needs to look like. But the most important one now, when you're talking about, the ICP for your or ideal candidate profile for your company, is the business athlete, right? Because that gets into what are the traits that they possess, right? Their why. And those aren't specific to the market, right? Whether the skills and the knowledge are. Those are specific to them as a employee or an associate that you're trying to bring on board that you think can help you. It's back to are they really, really smarter than me? I hope I get someone like that. Are they kind of results oriented? I sure hope they are, et cetera, right?
Are they curious and so on and so forth?
Exactly. Yeah. And then there's other characteristics, I'll call it, that you would look at, like, are they like really curious, and are they really good at listening? Are they collaborate? All these different, they're more traits than they are skills or knowledge. And that sort of
thing. Which we talked about in that Coffee for Scalers episode. We double clicked into all of these. Yeah.
Yes. And so I'll say those traits are really what go into your ideal candidate profiles. This is what we're looking for in terms of that individual, what they possess. Because I think if they possess those, I can teach them the knowledge stuff, right? The skills they can learn, or they probably already have done some form of those skills in the execution piece of it. And pardon me, if they end up doing the execution, right, in a previous life, or if they've done it with us, right? I think we're going to be okay there in the position description. But how do I know they possess these traits? And
Yeah,
that's when
yeah.
you get into, as you and I have discussed, Dennis, that's when you get into, there's a series of questions that I used to use all the time when I was thinking
Yep.
about hiring people. And remember how when I would tell you all, I would say, I want you guys to interview the candidates and obviously the recruiters for these, skills and knowledge
Yes.
and experience and things that you guys would all do that. And the recruiters would do that. And we would vet them out in that regard. I'm going to sit here and spend my time on the traits, or their why, as I call it, the traits
Yep.
and characteristics. And that's what you really want to think about when you're talking about your ideal candidate profile.
Yep. If you're listening to this, if you're listening to this episode and want to dive into an episode around business athletes, let us know in the comments or get in touch, and we'll make one of that as well. Yeah, and I was going to ask you a question, Pat.
Sure.
So, if you're hiring salespeople, ideal candidate profile, and you realize that, like, hey, if I hire people with good knowledge and experience of my domain, which could include like contacts that could be important for new business, how would you like? I found that means that you can go even faster sometimes with ramping and acquiring. How would you rate that, like, knowledge and experience?
Domain knowledge and experience?
Is that domain knowledge, domain knowledge and experience.
So my bias has been, whenever I've come into a new company, has been to, I'll say, I would evaluate people against my business athlete criteria first.
Yes.
Meaning whether I think they should be part of the company or not, meaning if they're existing.
Yeah.
And then second would be, do I think they have a lot of domain knowledge that can help us, or they have contacts? Because sometimes that can be a bit of a, if you kind of have there's the saying, at least here in North America, right? Sometimes you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah.
And things change so much in all these. That's the reason why they're even talking to you, is because things are changing in their industry or in their company. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the old way was the best way. They're thinking about doing something different, so that if you're steeped in knowledge of the way it used to be done, and you all of the contacts in there are the way it used to be being done, how do you know that those contacts are the ones that are leading an initiative to change the way that they're going to do something?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I would say, though, on the knowledge and experience piece, if you feel like you have pretty poor enablement in terms of like training and onboarding, those two might become much more valuable in your hiring. Would you agree?
Yes.
Like,
well, if you're looking at as long as they have a baseline ability of some of my business athletes stuff, then yes. Because they're going to help from a coaching standpoint with, peer-to-peer coaching as to helping the other people to get them ramped quicker, especially if you don't have any vehicle by which to, train them, coach them, etc. But even then, if you're not thinking about a way to invest in getting people productive quicker, meaning you're just going to try to do it organically, I would tell you that's a big mistake for you.
Yes.
A big mistake. And if you haven't factored that into, if you're coming in as a sales leader or a CR and you haven't somehow communicated with whatever company you're going to be coming into or taking a role in or do it, and you haven't said, hey, look, I can't just show up with, on premise here and become your sales leader and then just go hire a bunch of people and say, here's your laptop and here's your territory. Go get them, Tiger. You'll get to zero productivity.
One thing I've noticed actually in my time, I've interviewed 100+ sales candidates anyway. Maybe many 100. Yes, many 100+. And I've gotten a flavor for certain companies that train their staff really well. So one company that I know that's done that, I'll just say the name, Meltwater. Like, I know that they they brought on younger talent and train them really well. So I kind of knew if there were some people from those companies who really exceeded, they kind of learned their basics really well, and I wouldn't have to put too much resource into that, or maybe. And there's been one or two more companies more recently. I've just hired a guy from a company and I'm like, whoa, this guy seems like he was trained really well, or he came from like SDRs, where like if someone's risen up through that and stuff, you're like, oof, they've done a good job of outbounding and prospecting and stuff. So anyway,
So when you talk, so it's a great point, Dennis. And when you're talking about their knowledge of the industry, we'll say industry knowledge, meaning whatever industry you're targeting, right? As opposed to what I would call the domain. So let's say you're in CRM software or something like that. That to me, those are very distinct and different. But if you're talking about people that have industry knowledge, that can sometimes be good and sometimes not. Because so like in your example with Meltwater, right? Meltwater didn't necessarily have a lot of, I'll call it industry.
No, it was more sales
knowledge, but those people were really well trained and really good sellers, and they're wise. The traits and characteristics about each of those people that you brought on were spot on, right? As I call them, they were business athletes, right? And that's because of the development and the training that they got. Not because they knew a lot about customer ABC, right?
Yeah, and some of those companies got really good at hiring good business athletes because they were hiring junior people, because their business model was like bring them in junior and train them up. So
So they went for the get really, really, really smart people and have good business acumen or knowledge, business acumen, or not knowledge, but business acumen. And kind of till they got a lot of gumption in them. Usually young people coming out of school or early in their career, you bet they do if they aspired anything, and if they're a business athlete, right? Et cetera, right? So
great. All right. Wow, this has been a good episode. Anything else, Pat, we haven't touched on today?
I think hopefully we gave you guys some, and if you have additional questions, or comments that you want some materials that we can provide for you, whether it's business athletes or what the distinction between what goes into an ICP, as in ideal customer profile, versus what goes into an ideal candidate profile and a position description, just, let us know in the comments or shoot us an email or whatever, or text us or whatever it is, and we'll be sure to get back to you. But hopefully that's valuable for people.
Yes, we'll give out our numbers soon. If you get in touch one-to-one, we will. And the next episode is going to be how to enable a sales team and have a winning culture. So kind of wrapping up all of this from episode 3. And please subscribe, follow us on your favorite podcast service, and see you next time. Thank you.
See you next time. Thanks, Dennis.
Bye.